Up next is Stuart Rhodes. He's going to talk about how to prepare yourself and your community without the help of FEMA or government backup plans.
This is Stuart Rhodes, founder of Oath Keepers, with an InfoWars Nightly News special report on solutions. I want to take a minute to talk to you about what you need to be doing as an American. What's most critical is you getting squared away in your neighborhood, in your family, making sure that you are prepared. It's not enough just to go vote. The powers that be want you to believe that your duties as a citizen are only to go and pull a lever for Oathbreaker B or Oathbreaker A. That's not it. A full spectrum American citizen is responsible for their personal security, for their neighbor's security, for their town and their county, for their own preparedness, for their own food, and not just for you, but for your neighbors as well. That's why with Oath Keepers we've started our special program now for having these civilization preservation teams where we advocate that Oath Keepers go and teach people in neighborhood watches and in churches and within their towns and counties to get squared away and prepared and specialize in one area. Have each person pick, communications, medical, or engineering. That means like clean water, alternate power, whether it's solar or with generators, sewage, things like that. All the things that break down in an emergency, whether it's man-made or natural, you need to have these core critical things taken care of. These are things that are difficult to improvise. Either you have medical supplies and knowledge or you don't. Either you have communications gear and the knowledge of how to run them or you don't. Either you have the ability to have alternate power and water purification or you don't. So focus on those things. Make sure you've got those covered in your own family and then also in your own neighborhood. Get together with your neighbors. The most important thing you can do is to go start a neighborhood watch. That's ground zero for you. If you don't have a neighborhood watch, start one right now. If you have one, join it. Next level up is to go to all your veterans organizations and wake them up to the reality of the exposure we have as a country, the weakness we have in our economic situation, and also our constitutional crisis we have right now. Let them know what's going on and remind them of their oath, their responsibilities as veterans to defend the Constitution. And what that means is, as a Veterans Hall, they should organize themselves as a civil defense and disaster preparedness unit within their town. They already have officers, they've got a building, they've got money, but what are they doing with it? And they have members in that Veterans Hall who are trained in different occupational specialties in the military, different MOSs, whether they're communications, whether they're logistics, motor pool, whether they were a pilot. All of these different skills and training are useful for the community in a disaster relief situation. They need to see themselves as a unit, find out what skills they do have within that unit, and then cross-train and gear up so they can act as a unit together. They are the backbone for the sheriff's posse. They are the pool of people who will be there to serve as the county militia. They are there to serve as their state militia. If you can get them to actually pass a militia statute and revitalize your state militia, that'd be best. But even as a stopgap, right now, your veterans in those veterans halls have the training that can be used to make sure that your community is prepared and you're not desperate and reliant only on FEMA to come in. FEMA cannot possibly take care of all of you in a nationwide emergency. There's no friggin' way they can do it. And furthermore, you don't want to be vulnerable to what we saw during Katrina, where you had people's rights being violated, all in the name of security, having their guns confiscated. If you are prepared in your community to take care of yourselves, it removes the pretext. It's much more likely that police and military will say no to unconstitutional orders, such as orders to disarm you, if you have things covered, if you have your own community taken care of and you don't need outside help. If you're not desperate, it's much more likely they'll look at that and go, wait a minute, Mr. President, they don't need our help, they don't want our help, so why are you ordering us to go in there and declare martial law or disarm the American people? It's much more likely they'll say no. So that's why it's critical that you remove the pretext by getting as squared away as possible. And we advocate that you kind of use the Special Forces A-Team model as a model for how to do this. They've got 2 specialists in each of those critical fields, 2 medics, 2 communications experts, 2 engineers, and then they have security personnel to watch over them. The same thing can be used by you in your neighborhood. You don't have to join Oath Keepers to do this. We will be doing this within our chapters, of course, as a working model, leading by example, but you can do it right now in your own family. Decide who's going to specialize in medical, who's going to specialize in communications, who's going to specialize in power, and who's going to specialize in security. And then work that together, become a team, and then spread that same message to your neighbors and out to your churches the same way, your veterans halls, then your counties and towns. And of course, if you have a volunteer fire department or search and rescue unit, you should join them. If there's a sheriff's posse in your area, you should join that. If you don't have one of those things, start them. Start a search and rescue unit, start a sheriff's posse, and encourage your fellow Americans to go join it. Any of these things you have that are public institutions, make them stronger. So you consider it like two pillars going up. On the one side, you have official action or quasi-official, like a volunteer fire department created by the county, or a sheriff's posse under command of the sheriff. Any of these things you do have, reserve deputy programs, go and join them. But at the same time, and of course, encourage your towns and your counties to establish, civil defense units, to establish town and county militias, and then ultimately a state militia by statute. Do all those things if you can, but don't put all your eggs in one basket. Also, on the private side, do a neighborhood watch. Get your church squared away. Your church should be doing what the Mormon church does, storing food and helping people prepare. If your church is not doing that, they're dropping the ball. Go to your veterans organizations. It's all private actions you can take as a private individual among your fellow Americans in the private column to get prepared. Do that at the same time while you try to get your official, structures of government to do the right thing. And of course, the critical element is a sheriff. If you have a constitutional sheriff in your county that you can back him up with a posse, that's your best solution, your best effort you can focus on right now when it comes to that public column. But don't wait only for that. While you're working on that, start a neighborhood watch. And the best way to do that is throw a block party for your neighborhood and invite everyone in the neighborhood to turn out and have fun together. And then you get to know your neighbors, you get to know who the retired cop is, who the retired nurse or doctor or firefighter. You get to know all the veterans in the community. You'll find out your special skills you already have in your own neighborhood. And then you can approach them about being on a neighborhood watch, or at least being on a list of those that you can alert when things are going bad and call on them. You might not get them to step up right now to be in the neighborhood watch. So consider it like this. What you're trying to do is at least find a skeleton crew or a framework of those specialists, the medical, the communications, and the engineering. So even if you only had 6, 7, a dozen people who are really willing to prepare ahead of time, that's the nucleus for your broader community neighborhood watch or disaster relief squad when the time comes. So in an emergency, when an emergency hits, if you've got emergency power already lined up, if you've got medical care and communications, you can improvise everything else. You can improvise the search and rescue, or improvise the shelter, and improvise the security. That can be improvised, but it's difficult to improvise on the fly, medical or engineering or commo. That's why we focus on those 3 critical areas. And the other big one that's hard to improvise is food. Either you got food or you don't. It's kind of hard to do that on the fly. So you need to store away food, even just the basics, rice and beans and oatmeal. You can cook with just hot water. Store that aside, not just for you, but also for your neighbors. Have bags of rice and beans in your closet. Consider it a strategic food reserve. Consider it a military necessity, a national security necessity, a community necessity for you to have that. Like a tithing in church, 10% of your food storage should be for your neighbors. And all of you need to understand that you need to do what we used to have. We used to have 3 years worth of grain reserve in this country during the Cold War, because it was obvious and understood that if there was a nuclear exchange, it would take 3 years, potentially, to grow food again. Well, the same could happen now with an economic collapse or any other major catastrophe. You can have a serious interruption in food. It may take you a year or 2 to be able to grow food again. Imagine if there was an EMP, whether man-made or natural. That could do the same thing. Knock out the power grid, throw us back in the 19th century again for over a year. So you should be storing away, the Mormons are correct, you should store away at least a year's worth of basics, rice and beans, oatmeal, wheat, things that are really cheap and easy to store, and then 3 months worth of your own groceries you use all the time. That's the LDS model. They want you to store away the food you're going to use anyway and cycle through, but also have the basics. But store it for your neighbors too. If your neighbors are desperate and hungry, they're much more likely to submit to tyranny and to turn you in. So make sure that you provide for your neighbors. You can't just be a selfish prepper who says only for me and mine and screw my neighbor. Live the ethic of love your neighbor and prepare to feed them as well. If you do this, if you take the responsibility for your own security and for your neighbor's security and start to grow your own food again and store food for yourselves and take personal responsibility for your security, you will be a strong, resilient people who are not easy to manipulate with fear and disaster. If you don't do this and you continue to be weak and impotent and unable to take care of yourselves, then you'll be vulnerable for the manipulation of the elites. This is Stuart Rhodes with oathkeepers.org. You can find more about the civilization preservation teams by going to oathkeepers.org. We have it right there at the top of our site, all the information you need to know about it to get started.
Renowned author and expert Joel Skousen breaks down the globalist plan to shut down America and stage a new world war.
In one day, America will go from day to night. And if you haven't prepared in advance, there's not enough time to prepare in 24 hours, even if you saw it that early.
Coming to the InfoWar in November is our new documentary film presentation.
Strategic relocation is a systematic way to think strategically in the future about how do I safeguard.
Joel Skousen, Strategic Relocation.
The freeways are going to be crowded, they're going to run out of gasoline, they're going to run out of food, and then they're going to start to go north and south of those freeways.
Joel Skousen is renowned as one of the world's foremost experts in strategic relocation and the securing of your home.
We talk about natural disasters, the health environment, we talk about pollution, the water quality. My personal experience about being in every one of these states.
Government is digging in for the organized, incremental collapse of society and world war.
The U.S. isn't building huge underground bases and bunkers because of some terrorist threat. They know that a massive nuclear attack is coming. They want that attack to come. Most people won't even be ready and won't be able to get out of town when any of these nuclear weapons fall, because there'll be absolute panic.
There is no preparedness without strategy.
What I tell people is that you do have time. Prepare wisely in advance.
This Christmas, give the gift of preparedness. Strategic Relocation, the film, with Joel Skousen and Alex Jones.